the lead on this panel, we have Lauren Tucker. She is the Senior Manager of Programmatic and Digital at Carat. She's been in the industry for a number of years. She has worked on brands, and I think, are you leading Procter & Gamble? Yes. You're leading Procter & Gamble right now at Dentsu, so please welcome Lauren Tucker in our panel.
Hello. You can hear me, right? All right, so like Steve said, I'm Lauren Tucker. It's nice to meet you. I got to meet a lot of you last night and this morning, but for those I did not get to meet, I'm looking forward to hanging out for the rest of the panel here, or the rest of the conference. Yeah, so like Steve was saying, I'm the Senior Manager at Carat on the Procter & Gamble account. I used to work on the Home Depot, Pfizer Consumer Health, so I have a lot of CPG brands under my belt. So before we dive in, I just want to thank the Media Post team for inviting me back again. This is my 4th conference, but my first time actually participating, so I figured, I better get up there on the stage or they're going to stop inviting me to the free vacation, the conference, summit. So I'm very excited to be up here. Like I was saying, my first time. So yeah, we'll get into it. I'll let the panel introduce themselves. We'll start with a very easy question. Tell the crowd about yourself, what you do, where you work.
I will start. I am Dallas Keefe. I work for Zion & Zion, a local agency here in Phoenix, Arizona, as a senior media buyer and planner. I primarily work in audience strategy and programmatic and social, and I buy media, and that is me.
How's it going? I'm Nick Phillips. I live in Atlanta. I work for a company called Rooms to Go, which if you're in the Southeast, you very much know Rooms to Go. If you're not in the Southeast, you're like, what the heck do they do? Which is fair. I worked at Rooms to Go for 6 years. I left for about 4.5, where I worked at Publicis Group across all of the agencies, and then the short stint with Apartments.com, which was fun. And now I'm back where I work across the media teams, the social and influencer department, which is being newly built out, the content teams, SEO, just kind of everything. So I'm acting more as a consultant there, I guess, than anything.
Hi, I'm Michelle Rainbow. I'm with Response Media. We're out of Atlanta, Georgia as well. And we are a performance digital agency, and I lead the media strategy and the campaign management teams there.
I'm not Nick's influencer over here, but if you haven't gone to Rooms to Go and you do live in the Southeast, definitely go and get the Cindy Crawford sectional. It's really good couch. So if you're in the market for a new couch, hit Nick up. All right.
Didn't even have to pay for the sponsorship.
Yes, free sponsorship over here. All right, so we're just going to keep it pretty open-ended to start out. Obviously, the panel is talking a lot about multi-touch, but I'm going to start with single touch because I feel like not all clients are using multi-touch. Maybe I'm just speaking for Procter & Gamble, who thrives on a single touch rather. So I think, Michelle, do you want to kick off with any of your experience in that?
Sure. So I have, we had an IT software client, and we were looking to reach IT decision makers, and it was a consideration campaign. And we definitely use multi-touch across all the various channels. And when we stitched together the data afterwards from the media IDs, the website, and CRM data, I found that on average it was like 39 impressions across all the different impressions before somebody would visit the site. And I think our ad frequency was about 16 per channel. And it was across like video, digital, display, native, social, CTV, and audio.
And are you finding any channel more successful over another channel?
So definitely the user was much more engaged on social. Interesting, the information that Freddie just shared, we also found that on LinkedIn they were very highly engaged, and we were definitely able to map that IT decision maker with using that data a little bit better than some of our programmatic or third-party data sources. But we also found that, typically somebody would come from native or display as kind of the last touch before they became a lead.
And Nick, I know on our prep call you had a lot of different experience. I feel like a lot of it was the single touch. Do you want to talk about any of those campaigns or clients that you worked on?
Sure. So, multi-touch, we mentioned a lot of it is centered around cookies, and the cookie is dead, which is a miss, by the way. Like, why are we not saying the cookie is crumbled? Like, I don't know where we went wrong with that. Anyways, Yeah, I mean, I've worked across a lot of brands where, we want to do multi-touch, but there was always some kind of challenge with it. You have data lost. Someone was always able to find some kind of fault where they didn't believe it. You had a display channel with cheap impressions with like 20% viewability that was credited for all the sales. Lots of different challenges. So from that standpoint, I've worked on a lot of clients that have focused on single touch and the last click attribution, which is also quite terrible because you end up optimizing to things that might not bring you any incrementality. You're missing the boat on a lot of things. And I mean, one client in particular, they were a D2C brand, only did online, and they would say, we have this big promotion and we want to spend $50,000 on retargeting and we want a $4 ROAS last click attribution to Adobe. I'm like, great, your audience size is 2,000 people, so that's going to be very tough to do. But they refused to put any money into filling that funnel, and for that, their sales just continued to decline. So that was one of the challenges with single touch. Where I'm at right now, we're in a similar kind of state where a lot of our media programs are focused on that last click touch, but we're starting to finally pivot out from it. I mean, a challenge with where I'm at now is everyone is aware of us if you're in one of our markets, to my point that I made earlier, but in some cases, because you're aware of us, you might not be shopping us because the perception is somewhat negative. If you grew up with a lot of our advertising, it's very salesy. We tend to shout, this sale is amazing, which it is amazing. But it kind of leads to a perception of this is also cheaper quality, which isn't necessarily true. So we're starting to lean into what does that journey look like? How do we get a first touch amongst somebody in a less branded way that exposes them to our brand and gets them considering Rooms to Go? Like, oh my gosh, this is Rooms to Go product. It looks like the restoration sofa that I was just about to buy, which is true. We have those. So there's
The
that.
Cindy Crawford one. That's the good couch.
Yeah, I mean, we have a TikTok viral couch. Like, people come into our stores saying, do you have the TikTok couch?
I think she's running it.
It's me. I'm the social media manager too, so we're gonna have to change my title up there. All right, and when I was talking with them, Dallas has a ton of experience at her agency doing multi-touch, so very open-ended, but Dallas, do you wanna just walk us through any of your campaigns, clients that, you are focusing on multi-touch media planning?
I would love to. So what we like to do is we're a very cross-team collaborative team where we actually work with a CX framework called STCA, which is stages, touchpoints, contexts, and aspects, where we first map out the customer journey and meet that person where they are and serve them relevant messaging instead of working forward like, oh, we're gonna meet people here in Google. Well, maybe people are not searching. That's very lower funnel. So a client would be a senior living facility where it's very important to understand where that person is in their journey and serve them relevant messaging. So if that person goes to specific web pages or engaging with specific ads across different channels, we then can narrow in on that person and map them further down their journey. So it's very important to have your customer journeys and map them and then funnel them down, starting with awareness, obviously consideration, and then to convert. So that would be an example and how we do that.
Yep. And in any of those touches, would you say there's one that's more important? I know we were talking about last touch, everyone thinks that that's the one, but are you finding somewhere in the middle or at the beginning is more important, or are they all kind of equal?
Good question. We have different KPIs for each stage, which I think is very important to have. Obviously, for the brand awareness, you cannot have a conversion KPI. So each of those have their own sets of KPIs that we also measure, but we also measure through GA4 with data-driven attribution. So that's how we measure.
Awesome. All right, this goes for anybody, fair game. Maybe we can hear it from all three of you. How would you say that multi-touch media planning is affecting how you allocate your budgets?
I think there are several factors that go into that. You need to look at your target audience and what channel serves the purpose that you're trying to meet, and then obviously your KPI.
Yeah, I mean, as you're talking about journey, I was kind of thinking, like, we all should start thinking a little bit more like emo marketers, which plot along, like, the actual journey phases. And so that goes, I guess, to how you should be planning it, looking at the audience sizes, how much of that audience you want to actually reach, and start planning backwards from there. Is my goal that I need to drive incremental people to my site? Then I should probably plan with awareness at the forefront, right? Like, I need to hit 40% of this market. Are my budgets limited and I want to capitalize on sales amongst an already built audience? Then I should probably plan from the conversion side and then start to work backwards from that way. But, I mean, you asked what is the most important phase. I think that differs by each individual advertiser, but it is important to have that key KPI at each one of those stages. I do think there can be KPIs from the awareness front. Like, when we measure awareness campaigns or we run awareness campaigns, we often look at, like, brand lift studies. Never done a Facebook brand lift study. I feel like they kind of stack the deck against or for themselves. You know, like what was said earlier, you're going to run your own study and measure it yourself. They get to tell whatever narrative they want. And often, like, a lot of my clients ended up focusing more on reach and the cheapest cost per reach. But when you actually look at the engagement metrics of people engaging with the media from those reach campaigns, you would have people looking at the video for less than a second, which, you know, not much you can glean about the brand from 1 second. It just seemed to outperform because you were getting lucky and hitting a lot of people. So I think it's important to find those secondary KPIs in the awareness campaign of how is somebody at least engaging with the media. That tends to work hand in hand with the lift that you would see from a consideration side or an awareness side, and even an intent side.
Similar to what Dallas and Nick said, it's important that we are allocating towards awareness. I think it's a challenge sometimes with some of our clients where a lot of our media is very performance driven, and so they are looking at the lower funnel. They want to have those results. So it is making the case of why we need to be allocating more budgets towards the prospecting. I also find that we do a lot of optimization along the way. So we may start out with a plan, and it could be even distributed across some of the different channels. And depending on the performance within them, we'll shift dollars around to make sure that the KPIs are being met.
So we've kind of been talking about this throughout the entire panel, I would say, but does anyone have specific examples on just the challenges you've seen in multi-touch? I feel like, again, Procter & Gamble does not do it much because they love a good reach and awareness campaign. But what are the challenges you guys are seeing within your brands?
Well, I can start. With the IT example that I started with, there definitely were some challenges with data being available. We couldn't use any of the data from California, so it kind of limits. You have to make sure that we're creating a model that's probabilistic, and I think that just in general today that you have to find a good partner that's going to share the IDs and so.
Finding the right KPI to say it's effective. Like, it's hard. I mean, attribution is tough with all of the signal loss. An example is one channel that we have. If people are coming from a desktop, we see like one transaction on the platform data equals one transaction in GA. So 1-to-1, that sounds pretty good. On the mobile side, it takes like, I don't know, 40 to 60 transactions to happen before we actually recognize one in the individual platform. So just based on that, if you're looking at that, I guess, attribution based on GA, you're going to weight everything in favor of stuff that is desktop heavy, which is challenging. So how do you find the KPIs that are going to work for more channels that makes you feel comfortable with the money you're spending and makes you comfortable to invest the money that you should in those specific channels?
I would say measurement and everything else you guys said, and also finding the right audience. That's obviously been the challenge as well. We switched over to a CDP that really maps those audiences, but then once you get so granular, you actually can't target them. So that's also a massive challenge within this journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so we use lots of third-party data.
Yes, and Freddie talked about, the cookies dying. Don't wait for them to die. Are you guys doing any cool cookieless contextual campaigns or any experience you want to share on that?
I mean, we're building up our CRM efforts. You mentioned the CDP. That's something that's been going on for the last 2 years and really focused on what are the different ways in which we can capture an identified user or start mapping that journey from the first touch till the end. We have a lot of data that comes in after purchase, but it's hard to map everything back retroactively.
Got one?
A lot of our campaigns, we're helping different brands acquire consumers and gather the first-party data. So we're big proponents of it. And so, I mean, I think that it's the best defense in some cases.
Going back to contextual, if our clients do not have a CDP or CRM, we do contextual, but we do not do any third-party targeting.
None at all.
Nope,
Completely killed it off.
for my clients.
Interesting. Okay.
I will say we've actually always gone the broad route, which was mentioned in the HTTP side, because we've found a lot of challenges with using additional data sets. I mean, the markup and the CPM, like, it just doesn't pay off from a conversion standpoint.
So we also on our call talked a lot about emerging programmatic channels. Do you guys want to speak to how these emerging channels are affecting how you plan, or any cool examples for the group?
Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I will say CTV and digital out of home, I think, are going to start blowing up even more, especially for digital out of home. It's much cheaper than going traditional route, and also you get measurement on that instead of a guesstimated impression.
Spoiler alert, in our run through, we all said CTV and OTT, so we'll probably all talk about that. But OTT is essentially programmatic of like 2012, in my opinion. Like, you have new buying platforms springing up every single day that more or less do somewhat of the same thing. And in 2012, 2015, you had a similar stance on DSPs, where every single media plan had like 7 different DSPs, and you just optimized out of the ones that were performing the worst. But I think there's a lot of excitement and swirl around all of these new CTV platforms, but where a bigger focus, I think, should be is how we go about buying this inventory. So the nuance or interesting part of OTT is you have linear TV buyers buying it in one house, and you have digital buyers buying it in one house. And in some cases, like, they're both putting it on the same plan. And that's where I see a big challenge, is how do you get these two teams to work together to run the media through the same pipe and have a more holistic plan versus two things doing somewhat the same thing and maybe reaching the same people.
Yeah, that's exactly how we work at Carat, actually. So, I'm the programmatic team, but we have our linear video team that also handles OTT buying directly. So the biggest challenge that we've seen is if we're buying the same, say, Hulu, if we're buying that programmatically or direct via the linear TV team, they want us to block it programmatically because they fear, I guess, rather, that we're over-serving the user. So my team's trying to prove that that might not necessarily be the case. If we actually do hit them programmatically or directly through Hulu, we might not actually need to block them. So that's definitely a big topic over at Carat.
I mean, blocking might not be the worst case, but I mean, it might prove to be valuable or not valuable. But I think the bigger thing on the digital piece is it can be used to fill gaps. Streaming TV viewing is very segmented, and then you have a large portion that only watch it on subscription video on demand. So how do you feel that, or build that plan that reaches the broader audience outside of OTT, and you loop in streaming audio? How do you manage the reach across all those platforms? That's the real question, and having all of those run through at least one platform allows you to have a better view of what your plan is accomplishing.
And to kind of wrap it all together, I know we talked about challenges, talked about finding different success using different KPIs, but for somebody who, Procter & Gamble, we are just focusing on single touch. What would you say is the biggest thing to keep in mind if we switched over to the multi-touch media planning model? Best advice for someone who isn't really used to that media buying?
I think it's helpful to have a good partner. I think that's key. And in the analytics and the background, in the back, you need to be able to stitch everything together and start out with, like Nick said, like have a really clear KPIs for each of those channels and make sure that everybody's aligned.
You guys agree, or any new
No,
different advice?
I agree. I think your analytics team is going to have a huge heavy lift, but it will help you understand your data and how you're able to reach and measure your audience.
All right. Any last words before we give it to the audience questions or Steve's questions?
Should I tell my story?
I was hoping
Yes.
you would, but
Yes.
I didn't know if you wanted to, so I was being quiet over here.
Oh, no. So this was told to me a couple weeks ago, and at the time I was like, that's an interesting story, I'll never tell it. And since then I've maybe told it like, I don't know, 10 times. So clearly it's interesting. Not my story, like someone else's, and he heard it from someone else like several years ago, so, you know, passing another story down through the generations. So anyways, story goes like this. So two guys walk out of a bar, like every great story does, and one guy drops his keys. And so he sees a lamppost, and he goes under the lamppost, and he starts looking for his keys, and he still can't find them. And his friend goes, is this where you dropped your keys? He goes, no, I dropped them way over there. He's like, why are you looking here? He's like, this is where the light is. And that's kind of like attribution and multi-touch attribution. We look where the light is, and if we can't see the signals, then we just say we ignore them, right? And then we might not actually find what we're looking for.
And I'm that one person that targets the people where the keys actually were in the dark.
She has a flashlight.
I'm coming for
Bring a
you.
flashlight. Bring a flashlight. That's the answer to the joke. Bring a flashlight. Lauren and panel, thank you so much, but we have time for questions, guys. Let's dig in. Are you really going to leave it to me?
I was that good of a host that nobody has questions.
All right. Dallas, you mentioned digital out of home. We just did a whole event around digital out of home because we agree with you. It's about to blow up. Okay, so two things. How have you used it so far effectively? And why is it, if it is, proving more effective than some other channels? But also, how are you integrating digital out of home, programmatic or otherwise, in with the rest of the plan? So it's actually helping to enhance what you're already doing, and you can measure the effect. There's about 5 questions in there. Pick anyone.
I'll pick some of them. We currently don't do any programmatic digital out of home, as it's a very evolving channel for us, so we buy it traditionally. So now I'm kind of in the collaboration stage with our traditional media buyer, but I see the benefits of being cheaper than going traditional, being able to measure, as I mentioned as well, and also saving your client a lot of money, but also for the partners that we buy from, I feel sorry for you.
But what aspects of it are you able to reliably measure? And is it different from traditional out of home in terms of measurement?
Yes, so you can actually measure based on impressions versus an estimated impression that the vendors provide.
I'm sorry, but what are you using to measure those impressions in terms of who you're exposing? Is it simply volume? Are you able to use sort of some of the mobile tools that actually are able to retarget people who are passing by? Okay. I want to ask Lauren and Nick about CTV. I'm going to ask Scott about this too, because it seems as if you were sort of dancing around the theme of frequency capping, because it seems that when you've got, Nick, as you were saying, both of you were saying you've got 2 teams buying into the same platform. Very often the result is you're swamping the viewer. So I'm curious about where your discussions are, how you're thinking and actually measuring frequency capping on the CTV platform, and whether it matters.
Yeah, so this is actually the first quarter. What are we in? My JFM, January, February, March campaigns that we're actually not blocking, so I'll have a better answer for you at the next conference. I truthfully don't think we're gonna see, I think they're gonna keep going down the route of actually not blocking them. We'll see how this test goes. P&G's frequency is only 1 per week anyways, so it's already pretty low. So we're already not over-serving them, even if we were to hit them, the direct team and my team. So more to come, Steve.
I don't know if I believe. So our frequency comes from the platform specifically. I don't know how much I believe it, to be quite frank. Like, we see the numbers, and like, man, everybody I talk to sees our ads on Hulu way more than what we see. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure how much we really care about the frequency play. I mean, we're all about high frequency and really getting our message out there. But where I was getting at in the holistic management of traditional buy plus the digital buy is I get hit with we have all the scale we want. And I'm like, we might have all the impressions we want. Do we have all the reach that we want? And you don't really get to see that unless you have everything running through one pipeline where you can have a better understanding of how much of that market are you actually hitting across all of these channels versus I delivered a bunch of impressions through Hulu, and that's that.
Since one of the topics here is customer journey, let me ask all of you, all four of you, thinking now, we're sort of arguably post-pandemic. We have seen surge in online activity. We've seen the shift that during the pandemic we saw consumers make towards online shopping. Now that we've pulled back and people are back in stores, what has changed either permanently or and temporarily about the customer journey? As we come back out of the pandemic, what are the long-term effects in terms of how people actually are making decisions and shopping so far as you can see when you map that journey now?
I'll say there's a higher potential for somebody to buy online, especially for bigger ticket items. It's just become a much more trusted source of buying, where before, I don't know if you felt like you had to go in and actually test the product. But more than that, I mean, people are spending more time going to our website, spending more time on our site and doing more things before they actually ever go in store. We have seen some shifts of people going back in store since things have kind of been lifted, and even back before that and some other clients that I worked with. The one D2C brand that I mentioned, you know, when everyone just started buying online, they're like, this is how it's going to be forever. And then it started, as people started to go back into the real world and buy things, it's when their profits started to drop off, and they're like, what do we do?
So not a snapback, but
Not
the needle has moved.
A little bit of a snapback, but I mean, I think more engagement in the digital space is here to stay. More opportunity to get an identifier like an email from a customer is more commonplace than it probably was before. I mean, if you click on any ad, you're hit with a roadblock to get an email, which 7 years ago you probably weren't going to do that. So I don't know. I think there's just more trust, and you're giving your data, and people are a little bit more okay with that.
Anybody else?
I would say it's hard to tell with Procter & Gamble just because pre-pandemic, a lot of the products, at least that Carat handles the buying for, people were already buying them online, and a lot of the products aren't D2C. Again, at least the ones that I handle at Carat, you could just go buy Bounty anywhere. They don't have a website, bounty.com, where you're gonna add it to your cart right there. So I would say it's a little bit hard for me to tell with Procter & Gamble just because, again, like most people are buying those products online, or they were buying them in stores with, during the pandemic, everyone saw the toilet paper shortage with Charmin. So I would say, yeah, I feel like, Procter & Gamble consumers have just resumed life and buying as they were doing before the pandemic.
Has the delivery ecosystem, especially as it sort of mushroomed during the pandemic and sort of bleeded over away from just fast food, but really started moving into staples, is that something that stayed permanent, or is and is still growing, or has that snapped back?
I would say snap back. Yeah, have not really seen too much.
People want to go out and get their staples rather than having.
Yep.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.